What is up, Facebook land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. And before I introduce my buddy, Mike Huggins, I want to first dedicate a show. I really didn't think about who I was going to dedicate the show to this very minute. But I'm going to dedicate this show to people who are struggling with depression. People who are struggling with coming to terms with trauma. People who are having issues with figuring out why they can't get out of that rut. I know I went through it for about 13 years where I just couldn't figure it out. I knew I was in it and I couldn't figure out how to get out of it. And I don't have the answers. I know how it worked for me. And so I'm just dedicating the show to people that are dealing with that silent battle inside their own head that keeps them from fully living the life that they're meant to live. So that's who this show is dedicated to. The podcast, you can hear it everywhere. Pocket Cast, Anchor, iTunes, Stitcher, Castbox, you name it, you can find it there. Just put in 2 Dates and a Dash podcast and you'll find it. And if anybody is going on iTunes and is listening to the podcast through iTunes, please go there and give me a 5-star rating if you like the show and a positive review if you like the show. It helps with just the iTunes, Google search ranking nonsense. As much as that makes me angry to say that the ranking means something, it does as far as searchability and things like that. So if everybody would be so kind to go and give me a 5-star rating and a good review on iTunes, I would appreciate it. My man, Mike Huggins. Mike and I have been friends about 10 years, roughly. We met when he was a C-level executive for a medical device company, and we'd had coffee and had a few meetings, and things were going great. And then shit went sideways, and Mike ended up wrongfully, I believe, going to prison for a year. And what he's done since then has been amazing. I'm not going to give you too many details, so I want Mike to share that story. But safe to say, he's one of the smartest people I know, one of the most brilliant business minds that I know. He had a negative thing happen in his life, and he turned it into a positive. So without further ado, my man, Mike Huggins.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Truly do.
Anytime. I'm glad you're on the show, dude. I know that this isn't naturally your thing to do.
Right.
I'm very happy that you're willing to share that story.
Thanks. Get me out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
So,
that's good. That's what we want to do.
Right. Exactly.
That's what the show does. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but I'm sure it's not going to be comfortable, but I'm sure it will certainly be enlightening and hopefully inspiring to some people.
Right. Good.
All right. So I know you've seen the show. I know that I ask one question. Hopefully you didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare for this, but who is Mike Huggins?
Yeah. Matt, you kind of know the question's coming, but it's not an easy question no matter what. And I didn't want to prepare for it because I do want it to be pretty authentic. But as I was thinking about it, who I am depends on who you ask. So if you were to ask the federal government Department of Corrections, they would say that I am 604-19066. That's who I am. I'm a number, just a number in the system. If you asked my parents or my siblings, they would say I'm Saint Michael because I never got in trouble. I was the middle child, and I was not a person who liked conflict as a middle child. So I always was the good guy, if you will. I'm a father, I'm a husband. So it really depends on who you ask. But if you ask myself personally, I try to think of myself as perhaps maybe a seeker of knowledge and a seeker of experiencing life, of what it brings to maybe get out of what we were conditioned to believe or what we were conditioned to live, and try to understand other aspects of life, of the world. And so as well, I'm sure we'll get into, I've kind of gotten to that place where I feel like I'm at that place where I feel like I am able to kind of live a way differently than maybe I had thought it would be, 20 years ago.
There's so many ways I can go with that.
Right.
So, all right, let's lead off with, because you went about it from almost like this circular version of you based on different people within your life and different people that
Sure.
see you in certain ways. And you've lived I would say you probably lived 3 different lives.
Yeah.
The first life pre-prison, your prison life,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 4, your post-prison life, which wasn't necessarily one that you were as clear on what you're doing now, and then where you are today. So let's go back to pre-prison, because prison's going to be, I think, a big part of this show, because I think it defines who you are today. So prior to prison, you're a Wharton school business, got your MBA through Wharton school, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Did you always want to be the corporate level guy? Was your dream growing up to run a company? Or were you a guy that just happened to be smart as hell and you found yourself in the places where people needed smart as hell people?
So if you go back in time to my graduate days, Wharton School in the 80s, I graduated in 84. And at that time, if people were around then, that was the time of Drexel Burnham, the junk bonds, wheeling and dealing, and on Wall Street. I guess that continued on for a long time, but back then it was like the heyday of unsecured debt and just money flying all over the place. And so I went to a finance school. That's what they groomed people for. And quite honestly, I had zero interest in that. I had gone to graduate school, having already been a CPA. So I had my CPA. I had been sort of working in that sector, but not as a finance guy. And so I honestly didn't want to be like a Wall Street guy. And what and we know each other pretty well. I'm an operations guy, and I like to build things. I like to see things tangible. I like to see results, and I like to see things like in person. And so I didn't go to the operation side of things. So I was in charge of manufacturing operations, usually something tangible. And as you know, ultimately ended up in the medical device world, which was a perfect match for me at the time, because we were making products that helped people, supported people, in many cases saved people's lives. And so, gosh, I can't think of a better fit for me is to be involved in operations, running the operations for an organization that is providing relief for people who have orthopedic company, broken bones, spinal issues, degenerative diseases. So yeah, I mean that was, and what I would tell you is that, at least in my philosophy, it's never just about you or yourself. It has to be the circumstances have to be right, because look, there's thousands of people who've gotten their MBA from top schools, millions of people probably, and it has to be a good fit between the opportunity and what they can do. What can they do? Of course, you have to perform. So I think that's a given. Performance is, that's kind of the ground level. If you're not performing, then you shouldn't expect to rise. But even those who are performing, it has to be a right fit. It has to be the right opportunity. And I was fortunate enough to have opportunities where it fit me personally. Growing organizations, not multi-billion, because that's not a good fit for me. I like to know people, like to have hands-on. And so I happened to move through that corporate ladder, if you will, with organizations that really were a good fit. So as a result, I was able to perform, but also have a lot of satisfaction in what I was doing.
So you rose to the level of a COO, I guess was that your official title at the last company?
Well, last company, so there's a little bit of a story there. The company that I was involved with when I ended up going to prison was not the last company I worked for. So the last company I worked for actually was the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of that company. But the company that I worked for when all the legal stuff came down, I was Chief Operating Officer of that company, which was at that time just about $2 billion business. So it was a pretty substantial operation, if you will.
I remember distinctly. We met at I believe it was Dunkin' Donuts for coffee one morning, and we're talking about the situation with your legal problems, and at this point in time, you hadn't yet heard anything. You were still under the impression that, and let's before we talk about that, let's talk about what happened that caused you to have the legal problem. Let's talk about the circumstances surrounding it, because I think it's really important for people to understand how, like, without having physically done anything, you can be found liable for something.
Yeah. So the way it works in a regulated industry, so the healthcare industry, medical device industry is clearly regulated. It's regulated by the FDA. And I would say, there's other industries out there, right? The FAA, FTC. So there's a lot of regulated industries out there. But our company, our organization, and one of the divisions, so there was 4 divisions that reported to me, but one of the divisions was accused by the FDA of promoting a product that was off-label, meaning that the FDA said, we don't believe you have approval for that product. I'm simplifying it a little bit because there was some confusion between the FDA, what was approved and not approved, and what the company that was approved. But suffice to say, the FDA said this product is not approved, and you guys are promoting it, and therefore that's illegal. And that happened in 2004, and that complaint or investigation went on for years, quite honestly. So I ended up leaving the company in 2007 for some good reasons. I was tired, burned out, unrelated to the investigation, actually, and wanted to do something different. And I started to do something different. And so I left the company, and then I ended up becoming the CEO of this other company. Meanwhile, back at the first company, that investigation really started to get heated after I left. So now fast forward to 2009, I was at the other company as the CEO. The government said, hey, you're a target now. You're no longer part of this. We're after you and some others. And what they were after for was not that I was directly involved in the off-label promotion, but that I was a responsible corporate officer. Meaning, and what is that? I didn't know what that was at the time, but a responsible corporate officer is quite simply, you have to take responsibility for what under your organization. It's really that simple. So if something criminal goes on under your organization, it's your responsibility, whether you knew about it or not. And so in my case, I didn't know about it. Of course, the government was trying to argue that I did know about it, but there was off-label promotion going on. I didn't know about it, so I didn't stop it. And the government came in and said, that's enough for you to be convicted of a responsible corporate officer. It's a misdemeanor, actually. It's not a felony. It's a misdemeanor. They don't have to prove any kind of criminal intent. They don't have to prove like, well, this is the reason why I did this, or they don't have to show any kind of financial gain. There was no financial gain. All they have to show is 2 criteria. The first criteria is I was a senior person in the organization, and the second criteria is something happened under my watch and I didn't stop it. So it's kind of hard to argue that because when I really think about all that, something did happen under my watch and I didn't stop it. Now, and so that's it. That's the end of it. And so ultimately, myself and 3 other executives ended up being sentenced to 9 months in prison. Now, the interesting part, Matt, this is when you and I were having coffee. And funny you mentioned Dunkin' Donuts, because Dunkin' Donuts is a theme of mine, because it's the first drink I had when I got out of prison. I should be a spokesman. It's the last drink I had before I got sentenced, when I was going in for sentencing. I had a cup of coffee at Dunkin' Donuts right across from the Philadelphia federal courthouse. And the first thing when my kids picked me up as I was leaving prison was they drove me to Dunkin' Donuts for a cup of coffee. So, but anyway, So the four of us were sentenced, but at the time, everybody says, there's no way you're going to go. It's a misdemeanor. You guys have no record at all. You guys are upstanding citizens. It's a good company. You know, they do a lot to help people. So, you know, this is just maybe a fine or something. You know, they're just trying to make a big thing out of it. And as we got deeper into it, I realized that I think something was going to happen. And at the sentencing, it was clear that the judge was not happy with me or the other three guys in that matter, and sentenced us to prison. And not only that, sentenced us immediately, meaning that most felons, particularly for white collars, they get to report, they get to go home and get their financial order in place and take care of their family. In my case, I was taken in shackles from the courtroom at the Philadelphia courthouse and taken to the federal detention center, just right in front of everybody. You know, take your belt off, take off your shoes, take off all that stuff, and then walked out of the courtroom. So it was, you know, quite an emotional moment for me, and of course for my family. And then, you know, you take it from there. That starts another whole chapter in your life. But the thing I would maybe offer was that the process took so long. I mean, years, literally years. So, and then when I was charged with the misdemeanor, responsible corporate officer, that was in June of 2009. I wasn't sentenced till November of 2011. So I had 2.5 years to kind of sit on it, to think about what my future would hold. And so during that time period, I said, you know what, I'm not going to become a victim. I'm going to take some action and deal with issues head on. And I had this feeling that, you know, I used to call it the Huggins principle, that, you know, you've heard the Peter principle, right? That the higher an organization you grow, you grow to your level of incompetence. Eventually you get to a point where you can't do your job anymore because you're in over your head. You keep getting promoted. Well, I got to a point that the last couple of years working in that corporate ladder, if you will, that I got to a point that each time I rose up the corporate ladder, my level of unhappiness increased. And so I was getting more money, I was getting more perks, I was getting, you know, ego perhaps, travel and all those things. And each time that happened, I was feeling more unhappy. And it finally manifested itself in like chronic back problems. And that's when I said, something's got to give here. And I'm not saying, I always tell, I wouldn't wish this on anybody. I certainly wouldn't. But, you know, being charged, it basically kicked me off the ladder. I didn't have a chance to climb down the ladder. I was kind of shoved off the ladder. And maybe that's what I needed. I don't know. Because during that period between when I was charged with the misdemeanor and when I was sentenced, it's when I really tried to change my perspective of life. So I ended up, I went to a Buddhist monastery. I became a yoga instructor. I did a lot of studying of meditation, particularly guided meditation, and started actively teaching yoga and really embracing that. Certainly my back problems went away. But beyond that, I just started feeling that there's something here that seems to resonate with me. And it just helped me to get through that period of time. And it obviously carried me through when everything went down.
All right. 500 things are going through my head right now. So, I'm going to go back to when we had that meeting, because I remember our conversation. And as a police officer and someone who's been in this world for a long time, you know, we're having our meeting, and I remember you being very worried that something could go wrong. That at your sentencing, it was before your sentencing, you just felt something was off, and I kept saying, "There's absolutely no way, dude. There's no way they're going to put you in jail. You did literally a misdemeanor, and you didn't really do anything. Like you didn't have a hand in action." In culpability or anything. So when I found out that you were taken immediately and sentenced, you know, I was expecting we were going to have coffee the following week. Like that was my intentions. And I found out obviously that did not happen. I was flabbergasted. I was actually very disappointed in the system because I do feel sometimes that the system decides, and I'm part of the system. So, I mean, I guess I can speak better because I am part of the system. That sometimes there are vendettas, there are personal decisions made when Lady Justice should be blind to that. She should be fair and equitable and rule based on the circumstances surrounding the crime, not necessarily a personal opinion of a situation. I think, unfortunately, you got caught in that, and that kind of pisses me off a little bit. And I was pretty pissed off about that when I heard you went to prison immediately, and that you didn't have the same luxuries that guys that Bernie Madoff, for Christ's sake, he was able to go and get his shit in order.
Exactly.
He built billions of dollars out of people, and
right.
you somehow under your watch something happened yet you didn't know about, and yet you're responsible for, and you get taken out in shackles like some crazy mob hitman.
Yeah. Well, it was a bit of a show, but here's the thing I would tell you, Matt, and maybe this is a philosophy that I've kind of learned over time, you got to deal with the circumstances that you're dealing with. And I'm not going to defend the government, but I will say this. They certainly believed, something happened. And they certainly thought that I had more involvement than I did. And I certainly disagree with that. I happened to be there. But, if you go back, and I don't want to go through all evidence, but I mean, they kind of tried to connect the dots with emails and all that stuff. And we could look at 2 documents, and I'm saying, see, that proves that I didn't do anything, right? And then the government said, see, that proves that he was doing wink, wink. There's something going on. See, he shouldn't have written that email. But I'm saying I wrote that email because that's what I meant. And so it was a
perception is reality sometimes.
Perception. And so their perception of, or their narrative of what happened was actually quite compelling to the judge, of course. I mean, for him to do that. It just happened not to be true. But at the end of the day, I tell people, my job is not to judge. The only person who should be judging people, and that's the judge. That's his job. But we as this is maybe a commentary on something else, but we tend to judge people based on superficial evidence or appearances or race or ethnicity without really getting to know what's really going on. And so I saw that firsthand going through this process here. So what I tried to prepare myself, and maybe this was those 2 years of dedicating myself to this yoga practice or philosophy of self-care and compassion and all that, was to say, look, I need to surrender to the reality. The reality is I'm in prison. I can be pissed off, I can be this and I can be that, but my ass is sitting in prison. And right now I'm sitting in a holding cell, and there's guys coming in for their court dates. I'm in my suit still without any shoelaces and a belt or tie. I'm sitting there, and guys are coming in. I have no clue what's going on. In fact, it hit me. It was like an alternative society. It's really sad because, I was reflecting, saying, I used to go to these conferences and I'd see friends. Hey, Joe, maybe they used to work for me or our company, and they moved to somewhere else. Hey, how's it going? How's your family? Oh, they're doing great. You kind of have that chit chat on a professional level. These are incarcerated men who are having the same conversation. Hey, Joe, where you been? Oh, I got transferred over upstate. I got transferred here. I'm working in the commissary, or I'm in the kitchen now. But they're not going. They're not free. They're not going anywhere. And there's a whole society that's what we've done, and we forget about them. I mean, we lock them up and we forget about them. And we forget that there's actually human beings there, and we forget that there's families there, there's kids there, and that there's a huge ripple effect. I'm not saying don't do the crime if you can't do the time. Oh, I understand all that, and so I'm not advocating that there's no justice system, but I do think that there needs to be some type of awareness of what we're doing to a big part of our whole community, our whole society. So. For me, that experience was obviously life-changing, but I also I had this mantra, if you will. And I know people believe in mantras, and some people are crazy mantra, but I came up with my own little mantra to kind of get me through. And my mantra was simple 3 words: joy, surrender, true self. And I said that the whole time when I was sitting in the courtroom, listening to people tell everybody what a slime ball I was, what a really bad, evil person I was. To keep repeating myself: joy, surrender, true self. So I tried to take all that in, all the words that were said during that courtroom, and try to take it in, saying, this is something I need to experience. I'm going to take it with me, and someday I'll be able to use this as part of either my character or maybe some words of wisdom or something. So to try to take that and not just be a bitter person, if you will. And so every single day, I'm not exaggerating, every single day, when I woke up in prison, the first thing I did was say, joy, surrender, true self. Finding joy, no matter what it was, even if it's just meeting somebody or finding a way to be safe in prison. Surrender, knowing that I can't change my outcome. The good news was I knew how long I was going to be. I waited 2.5 years. My sentence was less than the time I was waiting. So, so I surrendered, knowing that I know when I'm going to be out. So that's good news. That's good news. I can get on with my life. And then true self is, no matter what, even in prison, I'm not going to be institutionalized. I'm going to be myself. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm not going to put myself in harm. But at the same time, I'm going to be myself. I'm going to be true. I'm not going to have to violate my own principles or whatever while I'm in that situation. So that really did guide me in a really positive way. So I can go down that road if you like, as far as, just kind of how the interaction went, but that was a big piece of my own survival there, if you will.
So I want to first, I didn't know that the 2 years between when you found out things were going to happen and when you were actually sentenced, that you did that. I knew you were doing yoga, but I didn't know that there was this exploration period of time that you had. What was there almost like this intrinsic knowledge that something was going to happen that you needed that for? Like, what was the final straw that, I know you said you had the bad back and stress and miserable and you didn't love your job, but what was the thing that caused you to go, let's do yoga? Let's find out about Buddhism. Like, where did that left turn start?
It started with a general feeling that I felt like I'd kind of reached a pinnacle, if you will, on certain people's definition of success. And I didn't feel successful at all. And, you start to question, where do you go from here? And it's easy to be grateful when you're climbing up a mountain, right? It's easy because, you're achieving something. But, for me, how do you be grateful when you're kicked off the mountain? How do you be grateful on the way down? We don't never talk about that. We always talk about, hey, just be grateful to all the people who helped you along the way. I get that, but how do we do that? So I struggled with that it didn't seem right to me where I was. I felt like I've kind of been there and done that, and so I really wanted to explore. So that yoga thing, when I talked about my back issue, it truly helped my back. But then something else clicked. It just started saying, my personal relationships are not where they should be. My relationships with my kids, it's just not where they should be. Something is out of whack here, and something I thought dramatically out of whack, and it just started to resonate with me. So I said, I'm going to explore this. I'm going to do this. And the craziness of all that was I did it. And then I started teaching at a fitness center right next to the office that I worked at. So I had people who used to report to me. I'm now their yoga teacher. It was very awkward for them, more so for them than me, but to have people that used to work for me come into yoga class and not sure how to react when, do that. But I felt like a calling there. And then, of course, very quickly, I realized that I didn't want to do necessarily traditional studio type yoga. I wanted to do something that was going to be community based and trauma based, and so part of my exploration was to understand trauma and talk about trauma going into that's even before the prison experience. And so going into the prison experience, that was like rammed down your throat trauma the whole thing was traumatic for a lot of reasons for everybody, essentially. So I had had a good, it was an amazing indoctrination into that world, and to be able to use those skills that I had been trying to work on just all sort of came together. But, it wasn't like a eureka moment. It was just like things started falling into place, and it's like, this seems right for me to do this. And then the legal stuff just sort of like said, you know what, Mike, you have no excuse for not doing this, and when we're trying to get out of our comfort zone. So for me, part of it was an ego. Here I was, at that time, I was the CEO of this company, and I wanted to be a yoga teacher. So how do you reconcile that with your friends and family? I had people come to me and said, Mike, I think you're having a nervous breakdown. Or Mike, you okay? Something's not right with you. And I felt better than ever, even though I had the stress of the legal stuff hanging over me. And because it's hard to coordinate or translate that transition. But the interesting thing is, you fast forward a few years later, and those same people came up to me and say, Mike, how did you make that transition? I'd love to. I'm not happy what I'm doing, but how did you do that? There's no easy way to do that. But for me, that transition just felt right. And it's really served me well. And it's kind of, I've just been able to then combine the two, the business world, what I was doing before, with this aspect of bringing some tools of empowerment and self-care and all that to people who otherwise wouldn't be dealing with that. I think it's a great marriage of the two at this point.
So you're now in prison, right?
Yep.
So you're a yoga instructor. You have all this, the 2 years of knowledge and searching and seeking and understanding before you knew that you're going to have a literally your own college for trauma, that you have all these students that you can work with, and also known as federal prison. You're now in prison. How did you, and I don't know anything about whether or not there's ever been yoga programs in prison. How did you start to get prisoners? Well, how did you get the prison staff, number one, and then the prisoners to buy into this stuff?
Yeah. So when I was I spent 5 weeks at the Federal Detention Center, the FTC, and there's nothing there. There's no equipment. It's a holding place. So there's units there, and there's no equipment. There's just cells, people basically waiting for their trials, and usually they're the ones who are waiting can't make bail. So there's some rough characters there, and my bunkmate was a really tough guy. It was very, very tough, difficult. But people have nothing to do, so they want to try to do something physical. And how do you do something physical when there's no equipment to work on? And that's the beauty of yoga, is that you don't need equipment. And so what the men would do is that they would, within the little unit I was in, they would set up a little circuit. And one section, there would be a guy who had a towel, and somebody would hold the towel, and the other guy would be trying to do bicep curls with a little bit of resistance training. I know you know a lot about resistance training, right? There were another one. There was the stairs between the mezzanines. The guy would, trying to do bicep curls. He'd be on the railing, kind of doing not bicep curls. He would be doing dips. Another one, they would be doing pull-ups on a cell door. And so there was just kind of a circuit. And another place, they'd be doing push-ups, and somebody be doing sit-ups. So this idea of this yoga thing was, for me, it was to calm myself down. First of all, to say, look, here's where I'm at. I know I'm a deer in headlights here, but this is my reality, so Mike, deal with it. So the yoga practice, and I'm not really saying so much the physical stuff, but just the breathing, got me to a point where I said, I'm up for this. I was made for this. This is a natural part of my experience in my life. I'm gonna make the most of it. So I decided I'm gonna get in that circuit. I'm just gonna. I knew nobody there. I'm just gonna go in there. And so one of the circuits, when they were starting doing push-ups, I just started doing some core work, some core balancing, some splits, nothing crazy. In fact, I didn't call it yoga. And almost immediately, several men came up to me and say, hey, what the hell are you doing? I'm like, oh, here we go. This is not what I wanted. But I said, I'm doing some core work. And they said, well, you look like you know what you're doing. Could you give me 6-pack abs? And I'm like, I don't know if I can give you 6-pack abs, but I can give you a hell of a good workout. And so they said, well, could you train us? And it was just like that they were desperate for somebody who could come in to do something physical. And that really was the hook, actually. So then I didn't call it yoga at the beginning. I had about 4 guys, and then very quickly it morphed into like 18 guys because I was doing some heavy duty power yoga stuff, sweating their butts off. I mean, crazy stuff. Now, to your question about were we allowed to do it? No. And so it's like anything in life, right? Some of the correctional officers were really happy we were doing this because it kept people quiet. It kept people tired. It just kept
where everybody was.
Right. It kept everything on an even keel, if you will. Other correctional officers saying, no, you can't do that. It's against regulations, this and that. And they were just no. I mean, and so it was never consistent. So we would just try to find the right correctional officer who would be sympathetic to what we were doing. So the interesting thing is, so that went really well. And then for those who go down this road, there's like a cascade effect. So first thing, they came back and they said, Mike, I don't know what this yoga stuff's doing, but, I slept better last night. And these, as most people know, the bed situations are terrible. The steel beds, the mattresses are about 2 inches thick. Sleeping is not, noise is there. So sleeping is a real issue. So to get a good night's sleep is a big deal. And so men came back saying, hey, I don't know what it is, but I'm sleeping a little better. And then they came back and said, I don't know what it is, Mike, but I'm just feeling a little bit better. I don't know. I have a little better attitude about stuff. Is that yoga stuff? I don't know. And so it just was this cascade. And finally, we got to a point where they said, well, maybe we try some meditation. I heard that's pretty good. And unfortunately, I had done a lot of guided meditation, which is really good for this situation where we don't want a lot of quiet silence with people who've had trauma. And it just was an amazing thing to watch that process morph into a full-fledged, we called it yoga, men of different religions. We had Catholics there, we had Protestants, we had Jews, we had Muslims, all practicing. So it was quite an amazing thing. And for me, it was too, it was a way for me to feel like productive, a way to pass time. But I felt like, I can do my time. This is maybe a way for me to this felt right for me, not because I was trying to be a big teacher, but just felt like this seems like these men, these tools, they've never been exposed to this idea of self-care or this idea of taking a pause between action and reaction. And ultimately, I was there 5 weeks, and ultimately I got transferred to upstate Pennsylvania to a minimum security prison. I had a lot more freedom there. And the same thing happened again. So I ended up teaching 17 classes a week, but the exact same thing happened. And but what was interesting is that those classes, they ended up just moving into even discussion groups. So beyond the yoga, we started talking about like men's issues and things like violence, and where I was, there was a lot of wasn't a white collar camp, if you will. It was a place that had maybe 20% of the population was white collar, and the rest were guys who had heavy duty time, who are now down to 4 or 5 years left in the prison, hadn't gotten in trouble, so they get to go to lower security prison. But they had a lot of time under their belt. So we had these discussions about, how can you practice nonviolence? Because that's one of the tenets of yoga is nonviolence. How can you practice nonviolence in a violent situation? How do you do that? How do you handle? So we got really down and dirty about some of those topics, and we started going to the cascade. There's violence. You start peeling away the levers. There's violence between violence. There's anger. Go down from anger. There's frustration. You go down from that. There's fear, and there's shame, particularly for men. There's shame that they don't like to show what they're doing to their families, what they're doing to their children. I mean, they don't like to show it, but they feel it. I can assure you that. And then when you strip all that away, is I'm not good enough. I'm a loser. And particularly in the incarcerated population, they're beaten down every day. So, for me to be able to provide these tools of yoga, just being a way to physically move, but also to start to do that self-exploration, we had really amazing results of guys kind of turn that around, starting to reconnect with their families, reaching out. And I'm not saying it's because they did a down dog, but it led to the process of them doing that self-inquiry where they can start to reflect on some of the decision-making process and perhaps reaching out to try to rectify some of the harm they've done. And we saw that pretty amazingly. So, and as I was leaving there, I honestly felt that there were so many people practicing that we actually were starting to see a change in the culture of that prison. I wouldn't say we changed everything around. We did. It's the system. But there definitely was a change in the culture, that it was a little less tense, a little bit more conversation about things. There was a little more of just sharing of our humanity, a little more of sharing that rather than everybody being on guard all the time. So I felt really proud of that. And I feel really proud that that's fast forward 7 years later, 7 years now. The program still exists there. It's now officially recognized by the prison administration people, and so the rest. I left, and then started doing work on the outside, going back in, if you will.
And let's talk about that. I think the thing that people don't. Yoga gets a bad rep. I don't know a lot about it, but I know that if my friend is passionate about it, I want to know more about it. I know my wife's taking classes, the YMCA offers it, whatever the case might be. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there's the exercise yoga, but the spirituality part of yoga on top of the physical component to it is really that mind, body, spirit connection. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the cool things that you've done, that you took your Wharton School of Business, your corporate America C-level executive mind, and you said, okay, I'm now back out in the world. I'm a convicted misdemeanor, not even, which pisses me off still.
Well, that was my nickname. I haven't told many people. They used to call me Mr. Demeanor. So it's another whole story. Yeah.
So you're now out into the world. You got to figure out how to reinvent yourself, right? You got to figure out what is Mike going to do to make money? What's the new journey that you're on? And you took the success. And the coolest part, it sucks you're in prison. I get it. Mm-hmm. But one of the coolest things is that you figured out a purpose from prison. Mm-hmm. And I mentor a lot of kids, and I do a lot of shows and podcasts, and I've been on a lot of podcasts. And passion and purpose are the two big things that everybody talks about in the speaker world, in the podcasting world, in the business world, the entrepreneur world, is how do you match those two things up? And those inspirations, those opportunities come in the most effed up places.
Right.
Mine came from a gift of a quilt that turned into 8 hours of writing 26,000 words of memories, which turned into a book, which turned into my pathway towards my new purpose in life. Yours was being found guilty of a crime you didn't commit and had no knowledge of, and going to prison and learning how to use yoga to get yourself centered and get yourself through that 9-month tribulation, and then turning that into, how do I help others as a leader? How do I help others do the same? Right. And allowing and creating, the coolest part of that is that you were accepted. Like you found a niche where someone saw you, didn't see you as the rich white guy or the white collar business guy that screwed someone over, or you found a niche where you were accepted by everybody. And then you've taken that outside of the walls of the prison and found a way to go back into the prison, which nobody ever wants to do. So that's odd. But you found a way to go back in, and let's talk about that. What are you doing now by going back into the prison?
So the idea would be to replicate the process of providing tools for people to live with a sense of ease, if you will. And we know prison is not a good place to live with a sense of ease. And so we go back, we teach yoga programs, but we also have a peer-to-peer training. So we are training incarcerated men and women to become yoga instructors so that they can carry that on. And it's quite challenging to do that because of the power structure within prisons. You can't just be like a teacher and say, do this, do that as a incarcerated person. So, there are some real issues to work through there, but we've had incredibly good success in setting up programs that are trauma focused. And that's really the key because the trauma focus provide space for the participants to do that inner work. So, and part of that is trying to create a safe place, which is really difficult to do in prison, to try to create a safe space where participants are willing to kind of let their guard down and do that inner work, where they can start to really assess where they are. And we just believe that there's some aspects of yoga that facilitate that. And it doesn't necessarily look like studio yoga, but it's really deep and it's meaningful and it's impactful. So we have probably about 30 trained instructors now, and they're going all in various prisons, teaching really, really deep into the system. And so now that's helped us to try to work on reentry programs, community programs. We're doing a lot of work in with youth in detention, and so and it's been really well received because we have an approach that makes it accessible for them. We don't use fancy language. We're not chanting. We're not doing, there's no religion piece to that. And so making it accessible so they can access the tools that are going to serve them, if you will.
Dude, we could do this for another hour, and we may end up another hour at some point. I think it's amazing how you've taken what was probably the single most negatively impactful moment at the moment and turned it into the catalyst, which created this version of Mike Huggins that is doing just as good work as you were doing with the medical device company. You're helping just as many people. You're doing the same tangible workload, effort, the operations side of things that you were doing there, using all your skill sets, but using it in a way that allows you to take the trauma that you had and how you coped with it and helped others deal with their trauma and spread that across the country in a way that no one's ever done before. And I think that's one of the coolest things I love Max Out obviously is done before business. And I love people that have the balls to do shit that no one else has done and aren't afraid to come up short sometimes. And I think you got giant cojones, dude. And
so it's just maybe 2 points I can leave you with this. One would be this, and I try to preach this, particularly wherever we are. Where you are doesn't define who you are. And that's really important because if let's say you're in prison, because we've been talking about that, but you could be dealing with addiction issues. You could be dealing in recovery centers, right? So where you are doesn't define who you are. So when I was in prison, I never defined myself as a prisoner. I said, okay, I'm a man who's incarcerated right now. But it's not who I am. That's part of the experience I'm having. And if we can do that enough, we can say, because we can get rid of the label. And what's really important though, you're not defined by where you are, but you're defined by the actions that you take from all those experiences that you've gone through. So if you go through those experiences and you don't take the right action, then you're going to be defined by what you haven't done. And we've been talking about prison, but it works the other way. That if you are a CEO of a company, you shouldn't be defined as a CEO. You should be defined as the actions that you take from all your experiences going to become a CEO. How you treat your people. How do you deal with difficult business circumstances? If you've got to lay people off, how do you do that in a humane way? How do you treat people, and not just numbers running by the computers? So we talk about prison, but it's both ends of the spectrum. Where you are doesn't define who you are, it's your actions. And then the other thing I would just say is, there's a guy named Wayne Dyer who some people may know of. He passed away a couple of years ago. And he said, what's a term I love, if we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. And my view is that we take a look at whether they're incarcerated men or women or people who have addiction issues, we look at them a certain way and we judge them and we say, they're bad. They deserve everything they got. If we can look at them a little differently and provide a little compassion, I'm not saying not provide justice. I'm not saying they shouldn't be in jail. I'm not saying any of that. That's another whole discussion. But I'm saying if we can look a different way and we can actually change them, we can provide they can provide the opportunity for them to do the inner work that they can turn their lives around. And so if we change the way we look at things, the things we look at can change. And I think that's, to me, it drives a lot of what we do, is to provide the opportunity for people, not judging everybody. Judge's job is to judge. Our job is not to judge. And then provide the opportunity for people to do that work so they can become back to their true self, if you will.
Right. I love that. And I think I've worked a lot mentoring adults, and I have, a friend of mine, Ryan, who was into the show. Did 10 years in the Florida penitentiary system for selling drugs. And, the great thing about life is unless you're sentenced to life in prison or anything in life, as long as you're not sentenced to an ending that you can't get out of, you have an opportunity to grow and learn and change. And, Ryan's a living proof of that. There's a lot of people that I know that I have friends of mine that committed crimes, went to prison. They're still my friends. And my job is to be a good friend to them and to show them what I've learned through life and be a good leader and a good example. And hopefully some of that rubs off onto them. And I think what you're doing can help stop the cycle of getting out of prison and going back into prison, and keeping people out and productive and doing great things and changing their lives and impacting, being there for their kids and their families. All those things can happen if done properly. And I think one of the things I like about the way you're doing things, and it's no different than what I do or anyone else does when they're trying to help somebody with a neurological or neuromuscular disease, is trying to find the root cause of why their arm doesn't work or whatever the case might be. You're finding the root cause on why prisons are sometimes chaotic environments, and then also how to stop if someone is getting out to ever come back in, and giving them the tools to keep them safe in prison, having productive prison lives, and then also when they get out, having productive civilian lives. And I think that's what I find the most intriguing about what you've created out of that. So where can people learn more about what you're doing? You have a website. I know there's a book. Let's talk about those things real quick so that we make sure we see real good.
So, thanks, Matt. So our organization is called the Transformation Yoga Project, and we have a website. It's simply transformationyogaproject.org. And I actually wrote a book about my personal experiences, and so I actually I can show you here. It's just if people can see that. It's called Going Om.
Oh, like going
Om. Not OM.
Right.
A CEO's journey from a prison facility to spiritual tranquility, and that's available anywhere. Amazon, Barnes and Noble. But that really describes in much more detail that transition we talked about, and the proceeds of that book go to support Transformation Yoga Project. And so we are active. We're in the greater Philadelphia area, into Delaware and New Jersey. And so people are interested, love to talk to you. And the other book we just came out a few months ago is totally different book. This is a yoga book. It's called Yoga for Recovery, a practical guide for healing. So we have so many people going through our programs, particularly in recovery centers, that they're leaving. They're only there for 5 or 6 weeks, and they say, Mike, I need to keep practicing. So we decided to write a real practical guide for them to continue out of home and talk a lot about this idea of how yoga can support your recovery efforts. So, but we have lots of information on the website. I have my own personal website. It's called mdhuggins.com. But most of my efforts really focused on Transformation Yoga Project and steering the organization so we can reach more and do more of this kind of work and get more community involvement in all this.
Awesome. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm in the comments on Facebook. I'll put in all the links to your website, the Transformation Yoga Project, the books, all that kind of stuff, so people can quickly access it. Hang tight. Don't get offline here. We're gonna, once we go close the show out, you and I are going to talk some more.
Okay.
Everybody, thank you very much for tuning into another episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. I am your host, Matt Cubbler. Thank you again to my buddy, Mike Huggins. He's a great man, good friend, and a brilliant mind. And I thank everybody for watching. It's important for me that I share stories like Mike's. The show isn't about me. It's about the people that I bring on. And I want you all to see them in the way that is shows who they truly are, and in a way that represents their ideals and what they believe in and what their story is. So I appreciate you tuning in. Have a great night. God bless, and go out and be kind to one another.